Yo, so do you ever feel like your poses feel kind of stiff, disjointed? You know kind of what you want to draw, but it just feels like almost you're posing an action figure, or things just don't feel connected in the right way, or sometimes you just don't even know what type of pose you want to draw in the first place. I felt the same way for a long time, but I want to share the 4 things that help my poses go from feeling really stiff and weird to feeling way more fluid and conveying what I actually wanted the pose to say. The first thing to think about is the story that you want to tell with your pose. So this is kind of just knowing what it is you actually want to draw. And I think that this is the most important part of posing, because this is what you're gonna build everything else on top of. This is basically your reason for making the drawing in the first place. So if you don't have this, it's gonna be so difficult to make it interesting pose. This used to be a huge problem for me because I didn't know what I actually wanted my characters to be doing. I just knew I wanted to draw something cool, but it was nothing beyond that. So because of that, I struggled so long to come up with a cool pose, and in the end I just could never do it because I didn't even know what my characters were supposed to be doing. And the story doesn't need to be anything like you don't need to have even a beginning, middle and end. It just needs to be a moment in time, because it's just one drawing, right? Unless you're doing something sequential, but that's just a whole different thing. It can just be as simple as, somebody's running away from something, a character's maybe fighting. It can really be anything, to be honest. Just as long as you have a clear idea of what it is that you actually want the character to be doing and what's going on in this moment in time. And you also want to think about the emotion behind the pose as well, how the character's feeling at the time, what the general vibe is that you're going for. And you can build everything else on top of that. That's going to help you so much to kind of just guide you in the correct direction for what to draw. So after you know the story and what it is that you actually want to draw, the next thing to understand is the fundamentals of posing, right? And you're going to learn that through gesture and gesture drawing. I have a video that I made not too long ago about gesture, but it just goes over the basics. So if you really want to learn and understand, I'd recommend looking for resources yourself. The best ones I would recommend is Force by Mike Matesi. And that's a book that just completely covers gesture, and it focuses only on gesture, and there's just so much good information in there. So I 100% recommend that for improving your poses. And I also recommend Michael Hampton's Figure Drawing, Design and Invention. That book covers other things. It covers some of the basic constructive anatomy, stuff like that, but in its first chapter it covers gesture and builds everything else on top of that. So I'd really recommend checking that out. And I think both of those artists have videos on YouTube that cover gesture as well, so those are also really helpful to look at. But when you study gesture and improve at that and use that to tell your story, it's going to give your poses a better sense of flow. So maybe even if you know what you want to draw, maybe it's a character drinking a cup of tea, right? When you draw it, it might feel kind of disjointed, and maybe the limbs are kind of just attached on randomly and it feels almost like an action figure, right? But when you have good gesture, all the parts of the body can flow into each other naturally, and it's just going to make the pose work better together, right, as a whole. And also for the more active poses, so for example, like I said before, maybe running or just any type of action scene, a fight, anything like that, the gesture will give a better sense of direction and force. Okay, so now that you understand the basics of how to pose and you know what type of pose you want to do, the next thing you need to do now is just building your visual library. I thought that I could just spend a few weeks or even months just grinding out to build my visual library for poses and then make things up by myself. But I quickly came to realize that there's just so many different variations of poses that you can't just learn everything all at once, right? It just takes so long of checking out different things, trying different things. But how do you actually build your visual library? So maybe I should define it first. Your visual library is basically just your memorization of what things look like, right? So you can build your visual library for poses by just studying a bunch of different poses. If you know that you want to draw a lot of action scenes and fights, you just want to study a bunch of poses from fight scenes or just fights in general, right? So you'll probably study a bunch of boxing poses, wrestling poses, maybe shooting poses if you want to draw guns and stuff. And after studying these many times, you're going to pick up on the patterns and the common things that keep popping up in these poses. So for example, with shooting poses, you're typically going to see them leaning forward into the gun, right? In order to kind of control the recoil. And once you pick up on this pattern, you're just going to naturally remember to add it into all of your drawings whenever you do poses where somebody's shooting. And with any given category of pose, whether it's running, jumping, sitting, you're just going to pick up on those patterns and just know what to draw over time as you keep studying it over and over again. And that leads me into the last thing, which is obviously we're building our visual library by studying these poses, and that's through using reference. So to study, of course, we need to use reference, right? But for a long time, I always thought that if I draw a pose using reference, then I'm just like cheating almost. That's how it kind of felt to me. But there's literally nothing wrong with that. And it's such a dumb and like ego-based mindset that we kind of need to get rid of. Because there's no way for you to know how something looks if you've never seen it before, right? And even if you have seen it before, if you never paid attention to it, you're not gonna just have it in your mind and just be able to pull it out of nowhere, right? So yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with just using references to figure out what you want to do in terms of a pose. Of course, you're gonna eventually just memorize the type of poses and be able to do it from imagination eventually, once you've just looked at the same category or type of pose so many times. A friend of mine suggested to me to do this, and it's helped me so much with my posing, is to just browse online, or even if it's not online, maybe you can find books. Like there's this one book that looks so sick, I forget the name of it. Okay, I found it. It's a Japanese book called Real Action Pose Collection, something like that. But yeah, like you can find books, you can find any reference that has poses. You could look at sculpture, you can look at like fashion magazines, you can look at anything that has poses. It's just whatever you like, right? But yeah, it's just to collect cool poses that you like and just build like a collection of them. So then whenever you want to draw, you can just go back, look at the cool poses that you collected, and just use them as reference. And then the other thing with using reference is you got to remember that there's no rules to art, right? So even when you are using a reference, you can just change it however you want. One of the main things I really like to do when I'm using a reference is just draw it from a different camera angle. Because a lot of times you can find really cool things in a pose by just changing up the camera angle. And when you change the camera angle, it's going to change the whole vibe of the drawing, right? That's more of a composition thing, and it's something that I'll speak about another time. But yeah, camera angles can change the mood of a piece completely. So maybe the same pose from 2 different camera angles is going to feel completely different. And now you just have a completely new thing, right? And even just camera angles aside, you can change the position of certain limbs. You can change so much stuff. Sometimes you start with a reference and the thing you end up drawing is completely different. So yeah, those are the 4 things that helped me the most with improving my poses. And I hope that you can get something out of it and hopefully improve your poses.